Our speaker will have the microphone, but I don't think I need one. There always has to be one wise rabbi in the midst of everything. A couple of things before we begin. This is the 21st year that we've been having a commemoration weekend. We have, thanks to First Lutheran Church, been able to have a dinner, and we thought we would change the pace, because after you eat a full meal and you come in and you listen to somebody speak, you know, I don't know how you are, but I'm getting up in years, and I tend to go like this. So, nothing against the speaker, it's just body clock, I guess. So we thought that it might be kind of good to just go with something light. We're going to have some a reception after. You'll have the opportunity to talk with Dave if you have any further questions after he speaks, and also in the parish hall. You can speak with him, and please ask questions. That's why we're here, to do some exploring. Other business. The Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies decided that we were going to try and do something for adults in terms of a trip. And we are planning with one of the area, George Gasol, from Airport Tour and Travel. We're setting up a trip to Poland. I know when you hear Poland, a lot of people think in terms of just death camps. But this is just not about death camps. This is about an incredible culture that was given birth in Eastern Europe and was there for 700 to 800 years. It's where Yiddish blossomed. It's where Hebrew was spoken. It's where klezmer music came from. It had its own film industry. It had a number of different kinds of religious styles and emphasis. It was an absolutely magnificent kind of a culture. And that doesn't even include the synagogues. And for anybody who's been to Slovakia, and if you've seen the old churches, we call them the active toleration churches. When Lutherans and Reformed were not really recognized, but then we were tolerated, and they built these churches made out of wood, but you couldn't use nails. It was the same thing for the Jewish community. They built synagogues without nails. And try making windows like that. It was really, really difficult. But the inside was just phenomenal. They did all kinds of we call it tolling in the Scandinavian tradition. This was on the ceilings, on the walls, on the doors, and it was like telling a story. This is part of the culture as well. So we are going to be going to Auschwitz, but we'll be in Warsaw, we'll be in Krakow. We'll be going to a small village where people have worked to put together what could be considered a shtetl, which is a village they were spread all over Ukraine, Poland, Lithuania, and down into Slovakia and into Russia. You will find very few shtetls any longer, and you will find relatively few Jews simply because after Hitler, or during the time Hitler was in power, 2/3 of European Jewry was murdered. So we have these forms. If you'd like to take a look at it, you're more than welcome. It will be happening in May of 2017. It'll be a 10-day trip. And I think the itinerary is pretty good. We're even looking at juicing it up a little bit. We haven't even touched most of our resources of trying to get people connected with what was and what is and what the hopes are for the future. And Anna has something for...
Another thing to this trip, as much as we can, we like to include people who live there. So it's not just staying there looking at a building. It's getting a chance to talk with the people who live there. And that's what we're working on. Two other things that I want to bring up. I think many of you hopefully are familiar with the journey that we've had which is for 7th and 8th grade students. This year we're trying two other things. One is with MAISD, Muskegon Area Intermediate School District, and their WINGS program. It's called Minecraft, and it's for 4th graders, and it's an anti-bullying class. That's where things get started. We're hoping that if we can get kids dealing with the bullying idea, then we can take it to a broader place and talk about governmental bullying, which will lead to the journey, which is the Holocaust. So we're kind of going in steps. Another program we have, and the other two teachers are here, Sarah and Robin, and it's called The Port. You go to the port before you go on the journey. So the port is for 6th graders, and it's the port, a journey to breaking down barriers. And we will be doing activities and discussions centering on identifying barriers that prevent understanding. This is for incoming 6th graders, and we know that sometimes things can be a little bit, I don't want to leave home and all that. So the parents are included in the Friday night, the parents are included in the Sunday morning, so that there's a little bit of familiarity. They will be spending the 2 nights, Friday night to Sunday, on the LST, and we will be doing all kinds of different activities, but the goal is to get them to understand what stops understanding, what are the barriers that we have, and how do you deal with them. So I will have this and that in there, and please come by and ask us any questions. Take it away.
Okay. Anna, you want to take this? From the folks from MAISD, David's not here. David is a representative on our board, the center board from MAISD, and also on the board from Muskegon Community College, Trinette Lottie Harps, and she's videotaping tonight, so doing a couple of roles. The way the program's going to work tonight, we're going to show you a 20-minute clip from the movie Nikki's Family. I think that 20 minutes will set the historical, give you the historical setting, and you'll also see our guest, Mr. Dave Lux, in this particular film, talking about a couple of different instances that he's recalling as a 6-year-old child being shuffled around because of what was going on in Czechoslovakia at the time, and the German presence that was continuing to grow and become more and more aggressive. And the only thing I would ask is if you could please turn off your cell phones. And I'm going to do that myself just to make sure. And I'll set this up.
There are some stories which were not only an audience, but may become their participants. Until 1988, it was all a mystery. This old man saved my life and that of hundreds of others in the Second World War. Yet for 50 years after our escape from almost certain death, we knew nothing about him, not even that he existed. Now he's celebrated as a hero. He insists that what he did was nothing to make a fuss about. This story came to fascinate people the world over, especially know more, much more, and they have questions. Why did he do it? How did he manage to succeed in what seemed like mission impossible? So along with others, I set out to discover and tell a story in a film. Given that I put my life to it, I could have done no less. Nick's story came out by accident after this scrapbook surfaced after gathering dust for decades. Once it did though, it sent out a whole chain of incredible events. Oh, hey guys, that's me. Before I left for England. The scrapbook is filled with photographs of children caught up in a lottery of life and death. Some of their drawings, urgent telegrams, and pleading letters from their desperate parents. Messages from a long ago past that brought on a rush of childhood memories. Of the pleasures of childhood in Czechoslovakia, the country we all came from. As I remember life in my own hometown, Bratislava, the capital of Slovakia, it was a pleasant, tolerant, multicultural and multilingual place. I learned to greet my mother's women friends with the then standard politeness of, I kiss your hand. It was, and I remember it still, Ruku Boska in Slovak, Ruku Liba in Czech, Ich kiss die hand in German, and Keze Chokolo in Hungarian. What I remember most vividly though are the small things, like going to a cafe with my father. We used to pictures, we used to get hot chocolate, lots of whipped cream on top of it.
From my childhood, as a family, we were very patriotic. My father encouraged us to go to all the Czech wonderful manifestations that took part, because Czechoslovakia was for the first time a country of its own, and we all believed in its great future.
Part of Shoah, in Shoah, and enjoyed many good things. My brother was marvelous. He invented all kinds of wonderful games for us to do, which were usually a bit risky and a bit naughty. Never would have done anything with them at all.
We live in a small village in the foothills of the Tatra Mountains. And we had a very happy childhood. We spent a lot of time in the woods picking strawberries and mushrooms and wildflowers. And we had animals. I had a chicken, and we had one cow, and we planted vegetables, and my mother taught us all the Slovak songs, and we sang together great dance, roadside, and we bed school, yes, roadside, dark brown beds, yeah.
Dancer and won many prizes, and young children in second grade. And one day, a girl comes up to me and slaps me on the face left and right, and she said, "My father told me to do that." So I was stunned, I was flabbergasted. How can she do that?
I was only about 4 or 5 years old, but I hit my head on a central heating radiator and I cut my head open. And I remember my father taking me to the doctor, and the doctor looked at it and he said, "That does need stitching, but I don't stitch Jews."
The hatred coming from Germany didn't just endanger Jews, but also the Czechs as well. They turned out to protest Hitler's demands for a chunk of their country, the so-called Sudeten borderlands. The Czechs mobilized to defend themselves, but they needed help from their allies in the West. Neither in Britain, nor for that matter in any other democracy, was there any great will to confront Hitler and risk war. So the British and French prime ministers went to Munich and ended up signing a humiliating deal with Hitler. The word Munich has ever since then stood for cowardly appeasement. At the time, though, when Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain returned here to Parliament and waved a piece of paper he had brought back from Munich and declared it to have brought peace for a time, a wave of relief swept through most of Europe, but not in Czechoslovakia, of course.
This town of Pobježice, which is near to the border of Germany. It all happened so suddenly. My mother took us 4 children. We didn't manage to take anything at all. We just ran for our lives. This was frightening for children.
I remember standing in front of a shop window where there was a map of Czechoslovak Republic, and in black ink was marked in the part which was handed over to Hitler. And there were people all around the shop making all kinds of bad remarks and says, "Well, you can't do this, we will fight and we will fight and fight." I remember the following day loading all our few belongings, there weren't too much, on a horse and cart, and we were out of there. My parents, my brother and I, and at the time I was just 6 years old, we had no clue what was going on.
There was a new refugee girl in our class, and I was most surprised to see that she had no shoes on her feet. When break came, I ran across the road and took out of my wardrobe my best shoes and brought them to her. I told Mother what had happened. Tears appeared on her face, and she hugged me, and she said, "You did the right thing, my little girl."
The first pages of the scrapbook and of our story came to be written in December 1938. You look at the pictures and the list of all of us, and you have to wonder, what made a 29-year-old Englishman do such a thing? In a way, what Whitman did was surprising. The world was his oyster. In the depth of the Great Depression, his job as a stockbroker allowed him to enjoy the good life. He was a champion fencer, who also loved to sail, to ski, and to travel. In 1938, with Christmas approaching, Whitton had his mindset on going to Switzerland for a skiing holiday. In other words, he wasn't exactly the kind of young man you normally associate with a passion for altruism. At least not until that phone call that changed his life, my life, and the life of so many others. The phone call was from Prague, from Martin Blake, a friend with whom Nicky had planned to go on that skiing trip. Blake said he couldn't make it because he had gone to Czechoslovakia to help people in trouble with the Germans. So Nicky decided to forget the ski trip and join Blake to take a look at what was going on there.
I went to Prague with the background knowledge of people in England who felt they knew much more about what Hitler was up to than the present government. The first thing I did then was to go around the camps where all those people endangered by the Nazis were living. To listen huts with one little stove in the middle, and the conditions were pretty terrible. It was very cold, snow on the ground. A lot of the refugees were really in very bad shape. They felt that the days were numbered before the Germans were going to arrive in Czechoslovakia. But how could they save themselves? What could they do? Where should they go? They were stuck.
While Whitton was in Prague, he was given a map that shook him up. He showed the map, a map of German plans and ambitions for territorial expansion to France. It says, Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer. One people, one empire, one Führer. Großdeutschland. And what it showed was that the Germans had ambition to take over the whole of Europe. Nobody had believed it.
There were many other people, refugees like us, small children. There was a fire, smoke from cooking and heating, and I remember being given something hot because it was cold weather there.
The desperation was not just among the poor in the camps in Prague and elsewhere. Anxious parents, having heard about this concerned Englishman, headed for Whitton's hotel.
Well, I didn't get much sleep when I was at the Schroebeck. I got to bed very late, and there were people knocking at my door in the morning. I saw those people who were in difficulty and danger. People on the suspect list for whom there was nobody to help. And I thought, at least I ought to try and save the children. Everybody in Prague said, look, there is no organisation to deal with the children. We can't deal with them. Anyway, nobody will let the children in on their own. But if you want to have a go, have a go. And I have a motto that if something isn't blatantly impossible, there must be a way of doing it.
So he started writing letters here, there, and everywhere, asking for help. And he had no hesitation about going right to the top, writing to the White House, to President Franklin Roosevelt. A few weeks later, he got a reply. Not from the White House, but from much lower down in the rapid food chain, from this building here in London, right behind me, which at the time housed the American Embassy. And the reply said, the United States government is unable to permit immigration in excess of that provided for by existing laws. But Whitman wasn't about to let this stop him. He and his helpers started making up the list of children without actually knowing whether they would be able to help them.
Well, this is the cafe that I came down every day. I was sitting there for more than about 2 minutes before the first people came to talk to me and find out how they could get their children to England. And this went on the whole time I was here.
As word of his campaign spread, it drew the attention of the Germans. They suspected that Nicky Winton's efforts were about something more than just getting out a few children. When their distant observations produced nothing, they decided they needed to get closer to him, which they did, using one of the oldest tricks in the spy business, the lure of a beautiful woman. They met, as if by chance, at the Hotel Shoah. Nikki was enchanted, and not just by her beauty. Her name, she said, was Kirsten, and she was the proud representative of the Swedish Red Cross.
I dare say she was very beautiful. I mean, traditional for a spy to be beautiful, isn't it? You can't have an ugly spy. It's a contradiction in terms.
Kirsten told him she had permission to bring refugee children to Sweden. Winton's hopes soared. Finally, a chance, perhaps, to get some children out. Friends warned him that she was a known Nazi spy. Nicky forged ahead anyway and kept on seeing her. And it paid off. Kirsten got 25 children admitted to Sweden. In fact, she flew off to Sweden with them and disappeared from Nicky's life completely.
My parents tried every way to get us out of Czechoslovakia. We tried to get to America. We tried to get to England. We tried to get to Palestine. But all the governments said our borders are now closed.
My mother got up every day at 4 o'clock and went to stand in the queues of different consulates for getting papers for Uruguay and some other unmentionable places. And there was no way out.
We knew that the timing was absolutely essential to do everything now and quickly.
The number
number of children who were in urgent need of leaving the country for safety was certainly over 2,000.
Britain kept on meeting with the families, working on a list of children. Then suddenly, his work was threatened by a phone call from London. The call was from his boss. Well, perhaps you keep the story, Mr.
As you heard, the name of the film is Nikki's Family. You might be able to, I know you can get it through Netflix if you're connected there, and I think maybe Amazon Prime. You can do some checking around, but you can also order it, buy it if you wish. It's a really good film, gives you a lot of information, historical background, but also about Nicholas Whitten. And now I'd like to introduce Mr. Dave Lux. Sound reading? Get a sound reading?
Hello. 1, 2, 3.
Hear it?
Good evening, everybody. Welcome. And I will start immediately, basically continuing with some of it was in the film, and I'll explain how I got involved eventually. I'll start from the beginning. Nicky, he saved almost 669 children and from Czechoslovakia, and I was fortunate enough to be one of them. If it wasn't for him, and I wouldn't be here today. So I'll begin by, as far back as I can remember. Keep in mind I wasn't quite 60 years old at the time. So what happened before that, I don't know. Obviously, we were Jewish people, Jewish family. When I say we, that includes my parents, myself, and my brother and myself. We were living in an area that I describe as right in the middle of a big field, which to me was farmland. I have no idea how we got there. Jewish people usually lived in heavy populated communities, like a ghetto, but voluntarily, and just like you have Korean people like to live among their own people. They have so many things in common. They did that out of, it was comfortable. They had the same beliefs, especially if you were religious. They used to go to services together. And so why were we in an area that I mean, right, the picture I see where our home was in the middle of a huge green field, farmland, and we didn't even have any neighbors. Most people would have a house, the neighbor on the left, the right, there was nobody there except, I recall up on the slope, there was a brick building, and I just tried to use a little bit of logic. I was guessing that was the owner of the property. And we described the house to understand, I mean, not a house, the home that we lived in. That also, I came to that conclusion that this was farmland. The house itself was more like a storage shed. And probably, I was thinking, the owner of the property, a farmer, had some kind of arrangement with our parents for us to live there. I don't know, temporarily or whatever. Just so you get the idea, what I was seeing is, it was, as I said, it was the size of a double garage with a, I recall it, there was a white curtain dividing it in the middle, and once on half. So one side was where we'd spend at daytime. I recall my mom would be there cooking and cleaning for family and 2 children. There was no electricity, and there was no plumbing. So for our water supply, there was a hand water pump, a wooden water pump. You might have seen that in some old movies. And I recall my mom used to go out every day, fill up a huge white pot, remember it was white, and fill it up with water from the pump and bring it into the kitchen. So that would be for the daily water supply. We had no toilet, so for that, we had to go outside to an outhouse. That was about 50 feet probably from the entrance, maybe 30. I'm not quite sure. And so I described the house because of the events that followed. You'll understand that it was hard for me to believe what was going on. Keeping in mind the whole time, I'm not even 6 years old. I don't know anything about Germans, about war, or whatever. And I mean, we didn't even have a radio, so we might have known a little more about every knew that there was a war coming, but they just didn't know when. Apparently, my dad, who was, we were from a poor family, so he had to get a job, and so he could support his family. And we had no form of transportation, so obviously he had to walk there. And looking all around us, I didn't see any other houses except that red house, so there must have been a village somewhere over the horizon that he had quite a distance to walk, but he used to walk to work. As I continue, I'll explain think I explained what happened that resulted in our parents feeling there was some danger. Probably my dad from his workplace, where they talked to other people, I'm sure they had radios, and it was common knowledge that the Germans would be there any day. So one day, when my dad was not in the picture because he was obviously working, and we were paid a visit by two soldiers, and I could describe what they looked like as far as what they were wearing. They were wearing these green uniforms, brighter than most soldiers, military colors, and they had kind of a hat, kind of a fancy hat. And I described these to, later on, years later, to Holocaust survivors who were older and from the same area. And they said, yeah, they were Hungarians. And it fit my description. And yeah, so that explains, actually, when they came in, which was an intrusion. I mean, I wondered, years later, when I became a volunteer speaker at the Museum of Tolerance and the LA Museum, I wondered, what the heck were they doing in this shed? Uninvited. They couldn't possibly have been looking for valuables. So I think they probably just enjoyed abusing Jews. So, and they took their sweet time. They stayed in the house, and they searched everywhere, and under the mattresses, made it look very, very official. And they were having a good time. They had smiles on their faces. In contrast, my mom, I mean, the dialogue between them, I couldn't understand. It was either in Czech or Hungarian, and we didn't speak any of these languages. We spoke with our parents, the only language we knew, which was Yiddish. That's as explained before. It was the language that European Jews passed down over generations. So we didn't understand a word, the dialogue between my mom and them. Because that's the language that my parents spoke. Now, I could tell from the expression of Mom's face that she was very, very upset. And I don't blame her. It's very understandable. So what happened? When they finally left, leaving the house messed up, they didn't clean anything up, they just made a mess and had a good time and left. So that same day when my dad came home, and my mom told him what had happened with this intrusion, they must have felt there was danger involved, and all I know is the next day, we loaded up our few belongings, probably were all tied together, bundled into a blanket or something, a couple of blankets, and they were placed on a horse and cart, and probably the owner of the property, the farmer, was kind enough to take us wherever we went. We had to go. And as it turned out, that was the only home I can remember as a child with my parents. Because after that, as my story continues, with our parents. And later on, we were separated from our parents, and I will explain in a minute. We're always moved around and never really had a home. At that time, let me go back a little bit. It's a little bit different part of the story. Okay, so we were taken on this horse car on a I don't know how long we were on that trip. It must have been a pretty long trip. But finally, we were dropped off at if you saw in the film, very similar, there were many other families with children. I think the film showed there were some at tents. So apparently, some stayed overnight. I don't think we did. I think we were there just as a stopover, and from there we were taken to the different location by, I don't remember what it was, who took us and who helped us to get there. But all this was done voluntarily. We felt endangered and we were actually trying to get away from an approaching danger. I don't remember, as I said, how we got to the next location, because at that age, keep in mind, I wasn't even 6 years old, kids do fall asleep. So there's a few gaps in my story. Okay, now we were in a multi-level building. But the difference is, here we were not there by willingly. We were being held there by Slovakian guards. It seems to me that it's quite natural for authorities, when they see hundreds of people, families and children running away, felt because they knew there was a war approaching, and they just wanted it to go any place, but not to stay where they were, because of the danger. I mean, if they were coming from the east, so they're going to run to the west. But that's what was, I think, quite normal. The authorities would round them up and just hold it there until there were other plans made to relocate them. And that's what actually happened to our parents after we were separated from them. At this place where we were being held, that was the place that we were separated from our parents. As I continue, I'll explain to you what went on, and it was very memorable and something that I'll never forget. It was at this location, it was the last time I ever saw our parents. As I already mentioned, we were being held there by Slovakian guards. The Slovakian guards, actually the Slovakian guards particularly, they had a bad reputation of how they treated Jewish people. They were basically anti-Semitic. And so that's what everybody, most people's opinion was on that. But all I could say as myself, what I saw, they treated us very nice. I mean, they didn't abuse us. In fact, one day, they, especially the children, they took all the small children, gathered them together, and they took us on a field trip in the area. It was, I still remember how beautiful the area was. And it reminded me of Switzerland, which of course then I didn't know what Switzerland was. But now when I tell the story, it was just like Switzerland. Valleys, mountains and valleys, and with pine trees. Just a beautiful mountainous area. day we were, let's go water. Excuse me, 1 second. Okay, the next thing I remember is after being there for maybe a couple of weeks, and nothing special was happening, but until I recall we were paid a visit by a young lady with blonde hair. Why will I remember blonde? Because everybody else had black hair or brown hair, so whatever this contrast, it kind of stands out to me, and I remember that. I have no idea what was going on. Now that we all know about Nicholas Winton, at the time, of course, well, I was 6 years old, not even 6. Obviously, I never heard of him. But many years later, at a 50-year reunion in London, I learned about the kinder transport and how Winton, his effort was to try to get children out on a program called the kinder transport. So she came to talk not only to my parents, and this lady was one of his volunteers that went out to talk to not only my parents, but anyone else in that building, and tried to talk them into letting go of the children, small children, and giving them a story that because of the approaching war, they'll be more safe if they let their children go without any guarantee when they will see them again. I've never understood how this lady was able to convince any parents. Well, it turned out none of them agreed to it except my parents. None of them. So, I don't understand how she was able to convince my parents. It's just impossible that she came one time and talked to them and they said, okay, take my children. So it had to be more than once, twice, 3 times, 12 times, which I'm sure it wasn't that many times, but it had to be several times. And even then, I still don't understand how my parents could do that. I mean, I've had question and answer sessions where people would ask me, have you ever forgiven your parents for letting you go? I said, forgiven? I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for them. I mean, they saved my life. I have no idea how this blonde lady was able to convince them, but apparently my dad and mom, they must have talked it over and made that decision. In the film, you saw how the parents, how the kids were separated from the parents. They brought them to the railway station, to the trains, and they put them on the trains and waved goodbye. That didn't happen with us. We were separated with our parents right there at this building with Slovakian guards, and I'll never forget the day when this happened. It's very dramatic, and as I remember it, this blonde lady came one evening to pick us up, and it was time for us to leave. And the picture that I'll never forget is my mom. She is crying, and I mean, more than just crying, she was so hysterical. And when you're hysterical, it don't always make a lot of sense. She's talking to me and my brother. I wasn't even 6 years old, and she's asking me over and over while she's crying, are you sure you want to go? Are you sure you want to go? And she was screaming at that. And I was upset because I don't know why she was so upset. I mean, I thought we were just going to go, she's asking us if we want to go on another field trip with the Slovakian guards. And that was a lot of fun. Why is she so upset? But that's the last picture I have of her. Because after that, I never saw her again. Now, Nicholas Winton, he had, as I said, I found this all out many years later, and as you saw in the film, that he talked to many heads of state, heads of state, and asked them to allow children, refugees, to save them from the upcoming war. And of course, none of them agreed except England. But they didn't do that without any conditions, and they put up several conditions. One was they had to find foster homes for each child, so the government wouldn't have to worry about them coming to the country and not having a home and going on welfare. And the other condition was they had to come up with a 50-pound English pound sterling bond, and that was a security. So that would help them, because the government usually pitches in and helps something. They don't just say you're on your own. One thing about the British people, they do, but they wanted some. This is one of the conditions. And the other thing, they had to, this is Winton, he had to come up with we have no passports, so he had to issue a traveling document. I still have here the original with my picture in it. And this all took time. And of course, the last but not least, when he had all this ready, he had the money, the bond money, and ready to go, he still had to wait for the proper arrangements for transportation to England. So now, after leaving our parents, the blonde woman came to pick us up, and I recall we got into a small black car, and when we get into the car, we realized, my brother and I, that it was getting dark already. So it doesn't take to be super clever to understand with a child that we're not going on a field trip. So where the heck are we going? And why aren't our parents with us? And I can just imagine, this is when it all started, all the screaming and yelling, where's my mom, where's my dad? But I guess, I don't know how long it took before we settled down, because the car must have taken off right away, and which was a pretty long trip. The reason I say it was long, because we must have been quite a while before we came to a certain stop, and by that time, okay, when you come to a stop, okay, all right, so you know you're going somewhere, but now you're curious, where are they taking us? And without our parents, I mean, it was not a very good feeling, worrying about all this. And remember is while we come to some stuff, as I said already, and it must have been a stunt that dragged out, and it was very quiet, and you could hear a pin drop. It was so quiet, and it started getting light. So it must have been on the road all night, just about. And I said it was very quiet, but when it's quiet, and the quiet was broken by, we heard the sound of many people. Turned out hundreds of people were coming towards us. Why was it? Did we realize they were coming towards us? Because the noise got louder and louder and louder as we were coming closer to where we were. And eventually, it turned out we were on a main highway to the capital of Prague. And it didn't take long when the streets on both sides were filled with the local civilians, and they were all talking at the same time, and that was pretty noisy. After a while, not much, didn't take very long, that suddenly there was a lull. I mean, they stopped jabbering and talking to each other. And they all turned to look in one direction, and keep in mind, at this age, I said, what are these people doing there? What is this all about? And so, as I said, there was a lull, and everybody was looking in one direction, and it didn't take long before we all knew what it was. It was a German, well, first, there was another noise which attracted them to look in one direction. It was German conquerors. And if you saw documentaries, the Germans used to use motorcycles with sidecars, with German soldiers, one riding a bike, and one in a sidecar with guns. And behind them, following them were huge trucks, open-end trucks, with German soldiers driving by. I recall their shiny helmets. They all had guns, and as they were driving by, what stands out to me, I always say, the contrast. Now, the people in the street were very noisy. They were screaming at the Germans because they were very unhappy. Said, what are you doing to my country? And I recall women crying. And in contrast, as the Germans drove by, they had big smiles on their face, like in a victory parade. Basically, that's what it was. It turned out this was the exact day the Germans occupied Prague, and there wasn't a shot fired to stop them. As it turned out, we were caught in the traffic. That's why we had stopped there. And later on, just out of curiosity, I checked what date it was. It was the 15th of March. It was about a month before my 6th birthday. That's the day they occupied Prague. Eventually, we must have got back on the road in this car, and we ended up in the capital, Prague, in the center. If you saw the film, I'll mention that later. Yeah, we ended up this time in an apartment building, but we were not being held there by the authorities. As it turned out, we were just being kept there until these arrangements that I just mentioned a few minutes ago had to be made. And that took quite a while. We must have stayed there maybe a few weeks before it was all done and ready to go. And I've been asked, how did you like Prague? I didn't see Prague. I was being held in this house. The only time I call vaguely be going out maybe once, probably to get pictures done for this document. And what I do remember is from the bus or how being taken to get the photographs or whatever other reason. I recall there were German soldiers everywhere. They had their rifles and the bayonets. And I remember scenes, they're coming out of stores, the arms full of merchandise, happy, they were having a good time, because obviously to me as a child, I could see they probably were looting the place and nobody tried to stop them. Who would try to stop a German? I mean, with a rifle and a bayonet. I mean, they didn't hesitate, they'd kill you. I mean, in fact, I always go back to saying, remember, I was only 6 years old. I still don't understand who these people are. I didn't understand who these Germans were with the helmets, and why people were so mad at them. I didn't know what the word, what was a war. I had no idea. At this building, where we were being held for all the department that were being held, for some reason, I don't remember any adults there. I'm sure there were, because the ones that, the only thing I can remember, there was about three girls that were there to keep us occupied. So we stopped screaming and yelling, I want to see my mom and dad, probably. And so, in fact, I remember something silly, but I remember being taught how to sew a picture using color thread on thin cardboard with a needle. I know it's nothing important, but I remember that, and obviously they were doing that to keep us calm and just. Eventually, all this arrangement must have been completed, and we were just waiting for the transportation. And when that happened, we must have been put on a train, although I don't even remember that. Keep in mind, at that age, maybe I fell asleep, and my brother was a year older than me. He actually remembers the train ride. I don't. But I do remember this train ride. They took us to the coast in Holland, and from there, being put on Holland, we were put on a boat across the English Channel to England. Now that I do remember. I remember the boat ride, and it was. I'm not sure if it was only for children or whatever. I just remember there was a lot of children on board also. The next thing that happened, I remember, is we arrived at a railway station, Liverpool Street in London. That's the main railway station. That's where all the trains that you saw in the film, that's where they brought the kids and dropped them off and were picked up by prearranged foster parents. Now, for some reason, we were not that fortunate. We weren't picked up by any foster parents. I don't know why. I'm thinking probably that maybe they ran out of time. The war was too close. So instead of being put in foster parents, we weren't picked up by a family. In fact, they had one little girl living there, and they were willing to let us stay with them until we treated us very nice, and I always am grateful to the British because they always were willing to, throughout, even much later, living as a young child in England, they're always willing to help out people who were less fortunate. So I'm very grateful for that. And they treat us very nicely. And one of the questions I've asked sometimes, because they knew that in England, were very strict about one thing, the British government, that if you're a refugee or whatever, as long as you're living in England, you have to go to school right away. And the next day or so, I was placed in a school, and I've been asked, well, how did you feel, being in a class with children that you don't know, you don't speak a word of the language, because I spoke Yiddish, I didn't speak English, and I don't remember anything that was really totally, maybe I was a little bit uncomfortable, but since I became a speaker, I did wonder, when I look at this picture here, my hair is shaved, and I'm wearing these old clothes. Looks like I haven't taken them off in God knows how long. And it's not just the clothes, how old they were, but the style. It's not average. In fact, I think it's a little bit comical. I mean, if you heard of Charles Dickens and Oliver Twist, so I call this, I was wearing what I call Oliver Twist designer clothes style. And so, and you know how kids are, they all do that. And they see something unusual, but they know that they shouldn't, they're discreet about it, so they whisper to each other and they point. So I'm sure that happened to us, but we got over it. And as I mentioned earlier, the family we were with treated us very nicely, but unfortunately, as I call this, the good life didn't last very long, because one day, war broke out, and the next thing I can recall is we were all outdoors, sitting on the grass, on the ground, and we all had labels on us for identification and numbers, in case we get lost, because kids do wander around. As it turned out, that the school that I was going to, which was a huge public school in London, not only were children being evacuated, but many of the schools also were transferred from London. Now, why London? Because London, everybody knew, it was common knowledge, that would be the main target of the German bombers. In fact, what happened is after we left, thank God we were gone by then, you ever heard of the Blitz? That was terrible, what they did to London, these bombers. I mean, it was almost destroyed. I mean, they flattened so many buildings. There were hundreds and hundreds of people that were killed, women, children, everybody. So, but that was the reason why they had contingent plans, because they knew this was going to happen. So in no time, they were prepared for this, and we were out there waiting. Eventually, we must have moved on and to wherever they were planning to take us, which was north of London, far enough where they felt that we would be a lot safer. Now, as I just said, that London had many heavy bombings. If you heard of the Blitz, and they used to have air raids, but we weren't totally to be a home for Jewish refugee boys. And I recall that whenever there was an air raid is when the equipment they had in those days, searchlights, and I don't even know they had radar in those days, but they knew there was an air raid very soon. They would sound the alarm, and it's the alarm that would go on for a while, and you could tell that, there's an air raid, you better go to a shelter, and people would run to the shelters, and of course, in our situation, the boys saw we had no shelter, so you go to the safest part of the house, which was under the main staircase, because it was a multi-level building. And that's where we would huddle and quietly listening, what we were listening to, if we could hear any planes coming. And in fact, after a while, we could tell the difference between Allied planes, British planes, and between German planes. The German planes had a totally different sound. And when we heard that with the sirens, I can't tell you, it wasn't a very comfortable feeling that we used to have. Just to hold down the breath most of the time. And once in a while, there would be explosions, and it was wondered how close it was to our house. Okay, so what's the next thing that happened? At this boys' home, we were roughly about 40 children. I have a photograph here from the boys' home. Our ages ranged from 6 to about 17. Some of the older kids eventually, later on, volunteered for the military service in the British Army. And they were, by the way, they were from all different countries. They were from, not only from Czechoslovakia, they were from Germany, Austria, Belgium, different parts of Europe. And in fact, I look at that at a photograph which I've kept. I still remember all their names. What's the problem?
No problem.
Hmm?
No, we're not there. We're not there. We have to call. We take the questions.
Okay, I mean, we didn't talk about winter. Didn't even get there yet. Because I didn't know about it. At this part of the story, I've never even heard of it.
Would you like to ask some questions? Any questions? How long were you in the boys' refugee home?
I was 10 years I lived there. 10 years. And it wasn't a picnic either. I think one of the reasons I kind of associate this with Urban Twist, if you know the story, they were orphans, I think, and they weren't treated very nicely there. And I feel the way we were treated was probably either like that or worse. It was not a good place to live because the supervisors, the people in charge, a man and a woman that we used to refer to as the old man and the old lady, never called them by name. They were plain English, not good people. They were very strict with us, and if you didn't do what you were supposed to do, they'd slap you. And once, twice, several times. And I hate to say that I'm not really complaining, but that's the reality of it. I mean, I survived, so I went through a lot of junk and hardships, but nice foster homes that some of the other kids did experience.
Did you feel that the way you were treated was because you were Jewish, or just because there were lots of boys who were sort of rambunctious and
What's the question again?
The way you were mistreated, would it be because you were Jewish or something?
Everybody was Jewish. All those kids at the boys' home were Jewish, and the supervisor, the people in charge, they were Jewish. In fact, they were immigrants, refugees from Poland. And if you don't mind me saying this, Rabbi Albert, he was a rabbi, you know, and unbelievable. In fact, I could never understand why. I mean, I came to the conclusion, and not that I was forgiving him, that he was taking out his anger on us. He was a well-established rabbi in Poland. He had a congregation that respected, and he enjoyed them, and he gave that all up to escape the Germans, and here he was handed this job. I mean, he wasn't forced into it, but he took that. Well, it gave him a place to live. He had a he had a place to eat, and not only that, he escaped with his whole family. Him and his wife had 3 grown children, and he succeeded in leaving Europe and escaping the Nazis. I mean, he should be kissing the ground every day that he succeeded in doing that. How many families did not have the opportunity to do that? I don't know if he bribed people or what, because he was probably a well-to-do head of a congregation, well-established. So he took it out on us. So did that answer the question? I don't remember what the question was.
They didn't have a vetting process like they do today. Well, I'm sorry.
Were you ever able to find out what happened to your parents?
What happened to my parents? Yes, more or less. When the war ended in 1946, you have to excuse me, in order to understand my direct answer, I have to elaborate a little bit. What happened was, why we felt this way, is that when the war ended, there were huge celebrations all over England, of course, after 6 years of hardship. There was food rationing, there was blackout, and bombings. All of a sudden, it was all over. Yeah, they went crazy in England celebrating. And myself, by that time, I was 11 years old, almost 12. Yeah, I think I was 12 already. I was very happy. I said, oh, wow. Now we're going to be reunited with our parents. We always assumed, in spite of all the news that we heard about the death and destruction that they found out once they were occupying more and more of Europe, you still hoped that, well, it happens to somebody else, but my parents, you never think it would happen to yourself, to your own family. But as happy as we were, being reunited with our parents, I still wasn't quite 100% totally happy until I would hear from my parents. And if they would have survived, it would have been very easy for them to contact us, because the British are very, very organized. Actually, the Germans were too. So that once thing that's common. Everything was kept record of, and all they had to do is ask the British authorities, give them my name, and they would find us like that. So what happened was, so we have to be very patient. I was at the time 12, my brother was 13, And we waited days, weeks, and months. And we finally, my brother and I looked at each other and said, I guess they didn't survive. We just had to get on with our lives. So, also, after the war, when eventually, after 10 years living in England, we became passionate pioneers. My brother and I was in 49, and the War of Independence was just over, and the state of Israel was granted by the United Nations, and we got really into being passionate pioneers. All we wanted to do is go to Israel. And in Israel, I didn't mention because, time-wise, didn't have a chance, that the whole time we were at the Boy Scouts for 10 years, we didn't know we had a living relative. We grew up without our parents, without the security and the love and the security of the parents. And we didn't even know we had a living relative until we came to Israel. And then, by chance, we discovered a cousin that was quite a few years older than us, and it was just really it's a story how we found her, and through her we found out we had an aunt in New York, Brooklyn, and Williamsburg, another beautiful place, and she desperately wanted to get in touch with us, but she wanted us to immigrate to America. And in those days, it was almost impossible for me to do that because the Czech border was the worst, because it was behind the Iron Curtain at the time after the war. The Soviets occupied Czechoslovakia, and they just wouldn't let, it was a dead quarter. But I did that. I finally agreed after being nagged by this aunt. I filled out the papers, and just to satisfy her that she'd leave me alone. And as it turned out, when later I volunteered, I was on a kibbutz, which is a farm settlement. The first 2 years, boy, did I work hard. In fact, they used to tell me, you shouldn't work so hard. In fact, I also have an art background. I went to art school in London, which was the best time I had in my life. It was something I always dreamed to do. But unfortunately, I was dumb enough to give it up because I was persuaded to go to Israel because they wouldn't let us be separate, my brother and I. We were that close. And if I would have waited a little bit longer, he would be overage. He'd be 17, which is too old. So he wouldn't go on this called Youth Aliyah, which is actually rubbish. But Israel would accept us if we were much older than that. They accept anybody. But, what did I understand? But I did have this urge to find an excuse to go, even though I knew I was doing what wasn't the right thing. In fact, I still have the original letter given to me by the principal from the school who advised me that I was making a mistake. Here I had a scholarship till I was 18 years old, and now I was only 15 and a half. And the letter says, should any opportunity ever open up in the future, I should be given that opportunity because I was accepted in the art school on a trial basis. And at the end of the semester, I was accepted. And I would have been able to the age of 18. And I kept that letter, and it's sad that I accepted it. And what was the question again?
I think you got it.
No.
What? How'd you find it?
Okay, when I got to Brooklyn, my aunt, one of the first things she told me, that your name is now what it says here, Pinkasovich, which is the document has this name. That's the name I used the whole time I was in England. I used to fill out a form, put my name in. I used to run off the page, the name is so long. So when and actually I was going to change it to Pinkas, like most of my relatives that were living in Cleveland were here. Not only were they living in America, some of them were here second generation even. So I was going to change it to Pinkas, but she told me your name is not Pinkas, it's Lux, L-U-X, and she should know. She's my father's sister. So that's how I changed my name to Lux right away. And the question was, what was the question again? Okay. And she, sorry, she stayed, it's not funny, but I'm funny. Yeah, sad and funny. So, one of the first things she told me is well, she told me, I always mentioned that, and she stayed in Europe, in Czechoslovakia, during the whole time of the war. She was never in a concentration camp, like many other Jewish men, not enough, were hiding in the woods during the whole time of the war, and until liberation. And she had some contact with my parents, and all she knows that they ended up being put in a ghetto. She knew that in a Slovakian Jewish ghetto, which we found out before that also by mail that we got through the efforts of the Red Cross. But we did get more, maybe 2 or 3 letters during the whole years of the war. That the letter came from this ghetto, and all she knows that towards the end of the war, this whole ghetto was part of the final solution. When Hitler saw that it was all over, he was losing the war, and he knew what was going to happen. You know, the British authorities would take him and try him and probably lynch him. But as a last effort to satisfy his own ego, and he's strong, he wanted to try to kill as many Jews as possible. So that was called the final solution. And this whole ghetto, I would say around 1943 or 44, they were all placed on a cattle train and shipped and taken straight to the gas chambers in Auschwitz. That was according to her, that was from her, that's what she told me, the best of her knowledge. So that's what happened to my parents. Okay? Did my brother
come to the U.S. with you?
No.
He's still in Israel?
God, yeah, he's still in Israel. I mean, there's so many things I can explain why he didn't come, but it's not that important. It's just the relationship I have with my brother. No, he stayed in Israel. In fact, he mentioned to me before that he would stay in Israel if his life depended on it, because of his experience of being of having to leave forcibly because of the danger of war. He didn't want to be in that position. He loved Israel. I loved it too. But, I just decided. Actually, I never decided to come to America. I just decided after a while. When it came time for me, 7 years later, I was called by the embassy that my numbers come up. If I still want to go, arrangements have to be made, fill out papers, medical exams, etc. And the reason I did this, because on second thoughts, I thought, you know what, as much as I love Israel, I do want to take a glimpse or see what it's like to see relatives. I lived my whole life without relatives. No cousins, no nothing. So, and I always figured, if I don't like, if I, after having got to know them, and I still want to come back to Israel, I can always come back. They don't close their doors to anybody. But no, my brother, in fact, one time, if you recall, there were several wars that Israel went through after the War of Independence, and one of them, it didn't look good at all. It was the Yom Kippur War, where they were surprised. In spite of their great intelligence, Israel always had and still have, somehow they slipped up, and it was a surprise attack, and things were looking very bad, and I felt afraid for my brother and his family and the kids. But I know my brother's attitude, so I called him up, and I said, do me a favor, Yaakov. Send the kids, he had 2 small kids, a little bit older than me, and I wasn't shocked by his response. He says, whatever we do, we'll do it together. He didn't want me to go through what we did. Okay, next question.
All right. Why don't we break, if you'd like to ask some questions. The one thing you said last night,
What?
you were telling us the story that you left Williamsburg in Brooklyn,
Yep.
and you went to Cleveland, which is where you met Helene.
Oh, I gotta make sure.
Now, okay, don't worry about it. I have a question. Did you marry him because he was a good dancer? Yes. Okay.
No, that's not the truth.
She loves you too.
She married me because she wanted to get away from her parents.
The reception is going to be in the parish hall. Please come and join us. If you'd like to talk to Dave, ask him another question, please do. On your way out, you'll see some envelopes by the door on the table. That's to help us continue to do this